wondering about the various issues that surround fishing and fisheries management, and they're often portrayed by some of the NGOs as being quite black and white and sort of simple with nice, neat, simple solutions that will work for them, when in reality these issues are extremely complex, extremely nuanced, and often quite poorly understood among the general public. So what assurances can you and your party give that you'll resist being driven by easy soundbites and sensationalism, and that instead you'll apply proper, rigorous analysis to these extremely complex issues? Thank you.
Ariane, do you want to go with that one?
Well, I just want to... Thanks for the question, Daniel. Can I just come back to you and ask, you've probably got something in mind around kind of like what you think is an easy solution that's put out there. Can you just kind of say a bit more about that?
It feels like we see things every week, but calls for a 3-mile ban on trawling, various things like that, that it sounds like an easy solution, but in reality it plays out a whole sphere of other much more complex nuances that are often not understood at either a parliamentary or a public level.
Okay, that's very helpful. So there are organisations around Scotland and fisher organisations too that are calling for that 3-mile, that ban. So we used to have that 3-mile limit a long time ago, and what I understand is that we had a much more rich abundance of whitefish in our seas at that time, in our coastal waters. So I think it comes back to what I said right at the beginning, we do need to find a way to take an ecosystemic approach, not necessarily a 3-mile limit all the way around Scotland, because it's nuanced. And I've come to Shetland and talked with you and James and others about that. And if it's a different need in Shetland, this comes back to also what I'm talking about, where we need that local governance, so that what we're looking at in Shetland, which is very far off the north coast of Scotland and has a very different set of circumstances. So local governance is one part of it, but absolutely finding the way that we can look for those places where we can do that ecosystemic recovery. So doing that ecosystemic recovery, we can bring the fish populations back. So again, also we talk about science. I think we need more of that. I think that's underfunded. I think the government also needs to be looking more at independent scientists. With the cod box example, we had independent scientists that were saying this regulation is not working, and the government initially weren't taking on board that science. I think now that those scientists are being involved in the kind of next steps. But so better funded science, a more local governance piece, but really, really acknowledging as a sector, as we look into the spatial planning, that we have to go for that ecosystemic approach. Otherwise, we won't have a fisheries for the future. So everyone needs to really get to that place where that's acknowledged. And I do feel like the conversations I've had with yourselves in Shetland, that is beginning to be understood. That and I know that fishers in Shetland are absolutely taking care of their grounds, but that's not necessarily happening in other places. And I also recognize that it is difficult, because you can't just say no vessels coming from anywhere else, right? You have to allow other fishing vessels coming from other countries to come in. So it's difficult, the whole spatial thing, the controlling who comes into our waters, who gets to catch fish. It is. I remember someone saying to me a long time ago, which was 5 years ago, it's a very complex issue. But I do think a way forward is that local governance piece, and really allowing local communities to have that say.
Emma, do you want to respond to Daniel's question about what assurances can you offer that it's not going to be driven by sound bites, and as he's saying, it's very complex depending on where they are.
So, Daniel, thanks for your question. I think you used the word complex in your question as well, and it is very complex. So, and I think we need to make sure that the government is on the ground, that they're engaging directly with the communities, that they're not driven by sound bites, and we need to make sure that everybody is engaging and looking at evidence, looking at the good, strong, research-based evidence, and on the ground, working directly with the fishers. That would be my goal for whoever's in government next time.
So promising no more kind of sweeping figures and more engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, I think sometimes I think headlines are what people will read. You know, people, you know, get the whole information based on get Brexit done, for instance, and so there needs to be more collaborative, not soundbite driven. There needs to be on the ground engagement and the listening, and that's what the government civil servants need to be doing. It's not just about CABSECs and ministers. It's about you know, being driven by quality data and research based on what they're gathering from the on the ground folks.
I mean, anyone on the panel, can you offer more specific assurances to Daniel's question about, just future proposals not being driven by soundbites, by kind of sweeping figures that might rally support from areas that aren't necessarily directly impacted?
Soundbites don't put food on the table, which is what our fishermen do, and we need to keep coming back to that. And I've been critical in the past of the lack of resource, lack of funding for the Marine Directorate. We talk about evidence-based. We need much more science and evidence-based to enable policies to be driven by that. With the engagement and local management, each area is different, and there has to be that understanding of the nuances around that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I think we understand that it's a hugely complex policy area, but we have far too many sound bites. We've had far too much moral grandstanding where it's not actually based in science, and we saw that about some bans that were brought in. So on the West Coast, we had a almost overnight ban on buried hen lobsters being landed, without any transparent analysis of done of what the issue was. It was around crabs as well, but it had a huge impact potentially on the Solway, where the fishermen down there believe that there's a different balance of lobsters, different sizes, whatever. But there was a real reluctance to do that work, and it was only after a lot of pressure that the Cabinet Secretary agreed that there would be a little bit of research done down there to look to see whether there was any nuances between the different populations. The committee, again, collectively, we can say this is something we do agree on, wanted to look into regional inshore fisheries management and the groups that are set up at the moment, because we don't believe that they're performing the way they should. They don't take into consideration the local circumstances, whether that's in terms of marine science or socio-economic impact. So we put on our business plan that we were going to be doing some research into that, and then the next day almost the government said that they were going to be doing some work, and effectively, as far as I'm concerned, kicked it into the long grass. So we've not seen the progress that would lead to some of that meaningful industry involvement, meaningful scientific fishing impact assessments that we need to be done. And hopefully, in the next session, there'll be a lot more pressure put on the government to bring forward a clear, transparent approach to regional inshore fisheries management, because there is something to be said, given the pace of change in fish populations because of warming waters and so on, that we need a government that's working at pace to work with industry to make sure we have sustainable fisheries. And that's not happening again. It's not happening at the moment. It's kicked in at the long grass.
Just in terms of the Marine Directorate, we had a visit to the Marine Directorate in Aberdeen, and I think we were all quite shocked. It was a committee visit. I think we were all quite shocked at what we found there. That was part of our...
in what sense? Just the finding?
Well, the actual physical buildings that staff were being asked to work in, and you know, the lack of progress in adding and putting more support in there, so we can get the evidence out, the science out, and understanding then the impact on policy. We have a great facility in Shetland, with UHI Shetland, and the scientific evidence there that's been gathered over decades. And we need to see more of that in the Scottish context.
More nationally, yeah. And Rhoda, you said you wanted to come in.
Yeah, if I can. And I guess it's disappointing that it's someone from Shetland asking the question, because we look to Shetland because of local management and how they manage quota and things like that as being an example. So it kind of shows you that all over. I suppose we are starting from the wrong place, I think, because the fishing industry doesn't want to see the demise of the fishing industry. they need to look after the industry for the future. And I think we need to listen to the industry as to what they want. And quite often it's like top down, telling the industry what they should be doing rather than working together and figuring out what is best for the industry. So I think local management works, and then we get rid of things like gear conflict, which happens, and you know, the scallop divers versus the trawlers, the creelers versus others. If you have local management, then you can fit everybody in, and where it works well and where the fishing industry kind of takes the initiative. And you know, Finlay mentioned the lobsters, but in the Western Isles it was the fishing industry without any government instruments or anything else that started V-notching buried lobsters. That was themselves, and they had an agreement between all the fishers in the Western Isles that if you caught a V-notched, the tail was V-notched, you caught that lobster, you put it back. There was no law telling you to do that. That was a totally voluntary scheme worked by the fishing industry for the fishing industry, and it worked. Now, why can't we trust the fishing industry? And there's bad actors everywhere, but to come up with the solutions and then put them in place. And you know, there's other places that have been calling out for protections and management and to be given those powers that haven't got them. Local areas, and government haven't given it to them. So we're kind of working against, I just feel there's always this clash rather than saying, this is your livelihood, this is your future, how do we work and to retain it for everybody?
Yeah, Emma, I wonder if you could respond to that, just this idea of giving a bit more regional, local power to different areas, given how varied the fishing sector is and the different demands of them.
Yeah, I mean, we have different issues in the southwest of Scotland. There is no offshore wind in the southwest of Scotland, and then the inshore fisheries is something that I'm not an expert in, but I think we do need to look at what's happening elsewhere. So we've had evidence that regional inshore fisheries management can be done really well locally, and we've had evidence at committee about that, and I would support that. I would support that. You know, we are improving in our digital technology, we're improving in our communications. There's onboard digital tech that's working. I think we've got about 1,400 less than 10 metre boats around our seas now, and so we need to support communication both ways in order to listen and learn and look at the practices that work better for everybody. So I would support further direct on the ground engagement. I think we need to look at probably seeing how the profile of fishing needs to be increased in the next session of Parliament, and I think that's something that I don't want to create like siloed approaches for ministers, because I talked about cross-portfolio working earlier, but we certainly could look at more local management, local voices, local inshore fisheries management, which has been done elsewhere, as in England.
But something coming in here, management on its own isn't the answer. We need knowledge and understanding to drive better management. The issue of science and funding needed to drill into the complexity is a good lead into the next question, which I'm just going to ask here before. Sorry, Finlay, I feel that you wanted to say something on that.
I was just going to say that there is some great examples of where the inshore fisheries is managed well on a collaborative basis without legislation. We've got a fantastic relationship between the creelers and the scallop industry and the Solway, where they have agreements about areas they can fish in, where they don't fish in, where the creels are going to be, and it works, just works. Industry's got together, and the same could be said about the cod box issue in the Clyde. A really almost insignificant part of the fishing industry when you look at it in a whole, but which has created a huge amount of public interest. But there was voluntary agreements in place. The creelers, the mobile fishery, and they got on fine. But all of a sudden, we've had legislation, we've had regulation, and the whole thing's collapsed. So these are two great examples where actually the fishing industry themselves are the best people best knowledge and the best way to ensure compliance, whatever, as those fishermen working together. And
Yeah.
so 2 good examples, and we need to see more of that. We've got examples of the issue with the squid fishery in the north, but there's a real reluctance from the government to respond. It's like sea bass. We're seeing an increase in the sea bass, but the government are really slow in pulling together proper, meaningful fisheries plans. And we've seen the fisheries plans have been delayed, which it means that some opportunities for the fishing sector to diversify into other opportunities is gone. And that, again, that's a prime example of on the Solway, where if we are seeing a reduction in the number of lobsters, some of these lobster fishermen could be fishing for cockles, or they could be fishing for sea bass or whelks. But there's a real a lack of awareness that the fishing industry needs to change. Fishermen should be leading that, but the government are certainly not facilitating that change that's needed.